All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our webinar. This is the third in our Innovations in Clean Transit series. Today, we're hosting Foothill Transit to talk about their zero emissions journey. Thank you so much for joining us. Next slide, please. Before we get started, I have a couple announcements to share with you and a couple housekeeping items. First off, I'd like to tell you about our 2021 SCAG Sustainability Awards. For the 15th year in a row, we're highlighting sustainable projects across the region in these 5 different categories. The category that's probably most relevant to our audience today is our Clean Cities, Alternative Fuels and Infrastructure category that recognizes outstanding projects that advance clean and alternative fuels, such as electric vehicles, hydrogen, propane, and other fuels. So please visit that website that you see below, or you can also find us on by searching Google SCAG Sustainability Awards. And we have actually a fresh URL that I'll post into the chat here in a minute. It's scag.ca.gov/sustainability awards. So an easier one for you to remember. Next slide, please. So a couple of housekeeping items before we start is this meeting will be about 90 minutes long. It is being recorded. So by staying in the webinar and chatting or making any images shown, you accept that those will be recorded. We'll post the recording in about a week or two to our website as well as the slides. Everybody is going to be started in muted and listen only mode. But at the end, we'll have a Q&A session where if you have a question, you'll be able to use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen, where you can raise your hand and we'll call on you, unmute you, and let you ask your question. Feel free to enter your questions during the presentations into the chat, and our speakers or I might be able to answer your questions for you. And then the rest we'll get to at the Q&A session at the end. Next slide, please. So today we have a great lineup of Foothill Transit staff and leadership who are going to be telling us about their journey in zero emissions. So first we have Doran Barnes, the Chief Executive Officer, followed by Roland Cordeiro, the Director of Maintenance and Vehicle Technology. We have Joe Raquel, Director of Planning, followed by Felicia Friesema, Director of Marketing and Communications. And then to wrap it up, we have Michelle Caldwell, Director of Finance, Kevin Parks Mcdonald, Deputy CEO, and then we'll hear again from Doran Barnes. After our presentations, we'll have a Q&A session, as I mentioned. So again, as you have questions during the webinar, please feel free to enter those into the chat. And at the very end, we'll have a brief trivia session where we'll ask questions about the presentation, and we'll have an opportunity for people who get the answers right to win gift cards. So stick around and pay close attention, and let's get started.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Doran Barnes, and I serve as the Chief Executive Officer of Foothill Transit. And we are excited to share our story in advancing zero-emission vehicle technology with you today. I'm joined by a great lineup of my colleagues here who will each tell parts of our story and share with you the journey that we have been through. It's certainly been exciting, but not without its challenges. And we'll talk about that during our time together here. Moving on to our next slide. Give you just a little bit of background about Foothill Transit. We are the primary fixed route public transit provider for the Pomona and San Gabriel valleys of Los Angeles County, so eastern Los Angeles County. serving the suburban communities, but also linking those communities to downtown Los Angeles. It's about a 327 square mile service area, so reasonably large in size, and about a 1.5 million service area population. Now, the numbers here that we have in terms of boardings are our pre-COVID numbers. Prior to the arrival of COVID, we were carrying almost 13 million boardings per year, 43,000 boardings per day. Our numbers are about half that now, but we're looking forward to the return of our riders once we get into a post-COVID environment. We operate a combination of routes, local routes serving the suburban communities, but also express routes linking into downtown Los Angeles. We've always been committed to clean fuel and sustainability and focusing on the environment. And of our current fleet, we have 343 buses that operate on compressed natural gas, 32 buses that operate in our zero-emission electric fleet, and that's really going to be our focus today. We're very much a mission-driven organization, and innovation is at our absolute core. And if we could move to the next slide, you can see our full mission, which is to be the premier public transit provider, focusing on these various aspects: safety, courtesy, quality, responsiveness, efficiency, and ultimately innovation. Each of these elements are incredibly important to what we do. Sometimes they push and pull against each other, but ultimately our goal is to do all of these things as we serve our communities. Moving on to our next slide. You might ask, why advance a zero-emission bus program? Well, if you're anywhere near the Los Angeles County Basin, and particularly eastern Los Angeles, air quality has been a challenge for many, many years, and we live with it day in and day out. We do have a large population base that we serve, which gives us the flexibility to implement a program like this. And a real key for us was that funding was available. We initially launched our program using funding that was provided by the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And funding is, again, something that we'll touch on at various points here, because it's great to have these goals, but there have to be the resources to be able to put this all together. In addition, a key driver has been the regulations that have been put forward by the California Air Resources Board. Again, important steps in moving us towards a zero-emission transit technology. But ultimately, again, it's about matching up that goal of zero emission and clean air and resources to make it all happen. Gave us the jump start to be able to get started on this journey. Moving to the next slide, certainly a key date in our history, September 3rd, 2010, over a decade ago. That's when we launched our first heavy-duty fast charge electric buses on a line that operates between the cities of Pomona and Laverne. We were the first in North America to launch this technology. And while there was an awful lot of work that led up to this September 3rd date, it's one that we definitely reflect upon as being a key milestone in our journey. In the 10 years since, we've learned a lot, we've experimented, we continue to learn, and our purpose today here is to share that story. At this time, moving to our next slide, it's my honor to introduce Roland Cordeiro, our Director of Maintenance and Vehicle Technology. Roland has been our point person in advancing our program, and will take you to the next piece of the story. Roland.
Thank you, Doran. Good afternoon, everyone. Next slide, please. As Doran mentioned, our deployment battery electric buses began in 2010 on line 291, serving the cities of Pomona and Laverne. In order for the buses to meet the service requirements, we installed a high-power fast charge station and 2 overhead chargers at the Pomona Transit Center. It's located at the middle of line 291. One charger serves the northbound buses, while the second charger serves the southbound buses. Over the last 10 years, we've charged our buses at the transit center over 200,000 times and logged 2.4 million miles on our transit buses from operating on line 291. Again, the Pomona Transit Center is centrally located on the route and offers an off-street charging station with a charging height clearance of 11 feet 9 inches. The location provides a safe and secure manner of charging buses overhead. We operate 15 short-range fast charge and in-route Proterra buses from our Pomona operations facility. Next slide, please. In 2017, we completed construction of 2 charging stations at the Azusa Intermodal Transit Center, adjacent to LA Metro's Gold Line station. They support 14 Proterra extended range buses operating on line 280. And this is our second fully electrified line serving the cities of Azusa, Puente Hills, and cities in between. The chargers are used to trickle charge the buses to extend the range beyond 150 miles that we get on a single charge. Some of the blocks in line 280 are over 150 miles long. The 14 buses are Proterra extended range, deployed from our Arcadia Irwindale facility, and we've logged over 1 million miles over the last 3 years of operating on line 280. Next slide, please. On December 2019, we completed construction and installation of 12 60 kilowatt and 125 kilowatt chargers at our Arcadia Irwindale facility to charge our fleet of 17 extended range buses operated out of that yard. The 125 kilowatt charger will be used to charge our 2 double-deck buses. And this is our first high capacity in-depot charging station. Next slide, please. For safety and efficient use of space, the 13 chargers were located on 2 bus parking spaces rather than on every bus parking space. We installed an overhead canopy to mount the dispensers and incorporated a motorized hose reel. The charger plug is mechanically retracted down by a push button to charge the bus. By pushing the same button, the plug is retracted back up and secured. Next slide, please. Our next presenter is Joseph Raquel, Foothill Transit's Director of Planning, who will talk about developing route planning for an electrified line. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland. Next slide, please. As Roland mentioned, here at Foothill Transit, we have 2 different bus and charging technologies. And our charging strategy really depends on what resources, or in this case, chargers, are available. So here on the screen, we have a picture of the first line that we electrified. That's line 291. 291 uses fast charge buses, fast charge short range buses, and they have access to 2 overhead chargers, which are located mid-route. And as Roland mentioned, each charger is specific to the direction the bus is charging. And
No. Leave.
Yep, sorry about that. So as you can see here, we actually build 5 minutes of charge time into the schedule. So the box here, you see PTC. You notice the 5 minute difference in time. That's where we build in the charge. So as the bus is charging, the customers have the opportunity to either board or exit the bus. But if they are continuing along the journey and not stopping at the Pomona Transit Center, they wait until the bus finishes charging before continuing. In the event one of the chargers are down or out of service, then the bus skips the charge in that direction, but must charge in the opposite direction. And in doing so, the state of charge is a lot lower than it would be if it had charged both ways. So the actual charge time increases from 5 to about 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the bus's current state of charge. And with a bus headway that's every 15 minutes, you can imagine what it does to the schedule downstream. Next slide, please. The next line that we fully electrified was line 280. Line 280 uses the long-range bus, electric buses, and also has access to 2 charging stations at the northern terminus. For buses assigned to this route, we use opportunity charge. And as you can see in the blocking schedule or vehicle schedule down at the bottom, we schedule a 12-minute opportunity charge every 3 to 4 trips. And by doing this, this gives us an additional 100 miles of range, which allows the buses to complete their cycle or their revenue trips. Without so, we wouldn't be able to accomplish running these longer blocks. Next slide, please. The next 2 routes that we fully electrified are lines 860 and 861 in the city of Duarte. This particular route uses the long-range buses, but does not have access to any overhead charges out in the field. And a little background on this route, when we acquired these routes from the city of Duarte, they requested that we use all electric buses for these particular routes. And when we did our testing, we found out that 2 electric buses were not enough to complete all the necessary trips, even though the amount of miles was in the service range of the buses. Now, why is that? On the northern parts of this route, of these routes, it's pretty hilly, so topology really plays a role. And because of the hills, it depletes the battery faster, hence you have shorter range. And how did we alleviate this, or how did we remedy this? As you can see down at the block vehicle schedule down at the bottom, you'll notice the second and third lines. You see that 2-hour gap? That's where we do a 2-hour opportunity charge. So what happens is the one bus does 5 trips in the morning, then goes back to the yard, charges for 2 hours, then comes back out to the field to complete the remaining service trips. Next slide, please. So some of the lessons learned. Definitely lesson number 1, test to see what the actual range of your bus will be, because Foothill Transit's range will not be the same as, say, ABTA or Long Beach. And if you're going to do in-route charging, the ideal location will be at the terminuses or endpoints and not in the middle. And definitely route variation and route characteristic really affects the range. And definitely test the vehicles on the different types of services you run. In our case, we tested it on both express and local, and then you see the results there. And definitely charge the buses every opportunity you get to help extend the range. Opportunity charging a bus throughout the day gave us an additional 100 miles, which enabled us to run a line 280. Next slide, please. Now I'd like to introduce our Director of Marketing and Communication, Felisa Friesema, who will now talk about our marketing strategy.
Thanks, Joe, and thank you, everyone. Hello. For the sake of time, I'm not going to dig too deep into the weeds and give you a broad view of how we tackled the challenges that popped up while talking about zero-emission bus tech to the public, but I am available to answer any questions that you have via email at ffriesema@foothilltransit.org. Also, you may have noticed, because I'm a marketing director, that a few of us have some Foothill Transit specific Zoom backgrounds. We've made those and quite a few others available to the public for download at foothilltransit.org/share. Next slide, please. Now, there are as many ways to talk about zero-emission bus technology as there are buses in our fleet, which is about 370. And in order to be effective, it was crucial to narrow it down to just 2 key goals in our communications. And of course, we drew directly from our mission statement, which Doran outlined earlier. We focused on enhancing awareness of safety and innovation. Audience always defines the message, and it became immediately apparent that our 2 key audiences, the general public and our direct stakeholders, had somewhat different priorities and needed different narratives. As with any new technology or scientific advancement, the public first and foremost wants to know that it's safe. And once you've provided ample reassurance through science and demonstration, they now have the room to be amazed. And once amazed, the customers ultimately just want to get where they need to go safely and without fuss. The bonus is that the ride is now much quieter than before, and it makes for a much more comfortable commute. Now, our stakeholders, they want efficiency and a better experience for their constituents. And they want sustainability and not just the environmental kind. Is the technology fundable? And then ultimately, who will pay for it? Next slide, please. Now, the tools of our communications are pretty standard. There are the digitals and the press outreach. I'm highlighting here some of the materials that we created specifically for grant applications and lobbying information. These fact summaries help sculpt a positive and professional narrative that takes zero emissions bus technology out of a pie in the sky territory and into the yes, we can narrative. And it has worked. The purchase of our latest zero emission bus fleet vehicles was funded in part by a Metro Express Lanes grant. And I should stress here that collaboration is also absolutely key with your internal teams. The communications team is in constant contact with planning, with finance, with our vehicle tech teams, all to make sure that our stories are accurate, current, and compelling for our targeted audiences. Next slide, please. A zero emission bus branding is different, but actually the same. Our service should be seamless to the customer. And again, we touch on safety and innovation in all of our public communications. As you can see on the top picture, this is our standard livery, and on the bottom is our zero emission bus livery. There's just enough difference to show that one of these things is not like the other, but they both definitely belong to Foothill Transit. And again, the bottom line is the customer mostly just wants to know that it works. We want them to know that not much has changed, but what has changed will make their commute and their communities better. Next slide, please. The result is that Foothill Transit is world-renowned for being a leader in zero-emission bus technology that's eager to share best practices to advance sustainable transportation technologies at home and abroad. Our successful deployment of this technology has also positioned us to more successfully obtain funding and to keep this project evolving and growing. This success has also led to one of our member cities, which Joseph just mentioned. The city of Duarte asked that we run their city system entirely with a zero-emission bus fleet. This success will again be amplified with the upcoming introduction of our nation's first ever electric double-deck bus, which is coming to an LA County road near you, slightly teased in the picture here. Next slide. I'd like to now introduce our Director of Finance, Michelle Caldwell.
Thank you, Felicia. How in the heck does finance follow marketing and communications, huh? Okay, next slide, please. So as you've heard, we were one of the leaders in the zero emission bus technology. And while that's great, it doesn't give you a lot of best practices to follow. So one of the things that we did was in 2018, we engaged a consulting team to assist us to consider all the issues and the elements of this new technology. We hired this team of consultants to do a complete study for us. And in 2019, the team, Burns and Mcdonald, provided us with a comprehensive study. So you can see this on this chart is our detailed fleet acquisition plan. And we provided that to the consultants so that they could calculate both the annual bus replacement costs and the total number of e-buses at each yard, or they call them depot, we call them yards. And this chart shows that from 2017 through 2033, we would be adding 353 new buses as our existing CNG fleet reached the end of its useful life. At approximately $1 million per bus, this chart tells a story that the total cost for the new buses would be approximately $350 million. But as we worked through this study, we found that actually we would need to purchase 530 new buses because of the range issues that you heard Joe speak about earlier in our presentation. Therefore, the study pretty much told us that we would need to purchase 1.5 new battery electric buses for every CNG replacement bus. Next slide, please. So one of the things that the study recommended was that we were not buying the buses all at once. We were buying the buses over a 30-year period. And so they also recommended that we electrify our yards over time. This allowed for the service to be gradually transitioned. So we would start with one yard, we would do enough electricity to charge, say, the first 14 buses, and then we would go to the next yard. As we purchased the new buses, we would then electrify the yards. The study did tell us that the total cost of electrifying both yards was estimated in 2019 dollars to be $120 million. Next slide, please. The consultants also provided us with recommendations for operations. From a financial perspective, they recommended that we only charge the buses during off-peak electricity usage, which would lower our overall costs. as I listened to Joe's presentation today about the opportunity charging and the charging en route and the charging in the middle of the day. And as we also noted when our consultants also made the recommendation for charging in the middle of the night, that means all the buses are in the yard all at the same time, and the mechanics and the service attendants are moving the buses around so that some can be charged and some can go off in the parking lot. A lot of activity in the middle of the night to get all those buses charged. So that seemed a bit challenging. Other yard activities, you know, the typical maintenance and the fare collection, they felt all that could continue like it is today. Next slide, please. Okay, so this slide compares the cost of purchasing and operating the CNG buses with the battery electric bus fleet. Using those off-peak charging assumptions, this chart showed that the BEB, the battery electric buses, will cost approximately $500 million over 25 years more than the CNG buses. So although we are excited about transitioning to an even cleaner fuel than CNG, we are constantly on the prowl for funding solutions. How will we buy all of these new buses and electrify our yards and with the current operating funding that we have today? Always a challenge for the finance people. Next slide, please. So as part of this, as part of the kind of, I don't want to say concern about finances, but as part of the search for cost savings and more revenue, we asked our consultants to also do a comparison of battery electric bus versus fuel cell electric, also zero emission. And over the time it took us to do this study, we began to get results from our other transit partners who were using fuel cell technology. And so this seemed like something we should add to this study. And of course, Burns and Mcdonald agreed to do it. Next slide, please. One of the things that you get when you go to the zero emission world is there are some credits and some incentives available for transit agencies to pursue to help with some of these costs, which are a great deal more than just running the CNG fleet. So the study also considered the rebates and the incentives for the transition to either BEB or fuel cell. And you can see that for the BEB, for the battery electric buses, we have the LCFS credit revenue, which is not available for the fuel cell. The HVIP rebate is more for the fuel cell buses, primarily because the fuel cell buses cost more than the battery electric buses. And then of course, there's no electricity rebates because there's no electricity for the fuel cell, you actually get fuel. All right, next slide, please. The result of the comparison is that the fuel cell bus is slightly more expensive on an annualized basis. You can see 48 million versus 42 million versus 36 million for the CNG, primarily due to the cost of fuel. See the green, or I guess it's green, kind of pea green bar there. That's the cost of fuel. Compared to the electricity fees, assuming that the buses are only charged during the optimal off-peak charging times. And also this assumes that the fuel cell cost is not discounted. We used the current cost of fuel that our partners, AC Transit and Sunline Transit are using for their, or OCTA are using for their fuel cell. So that was the result of the study and the financial result. And now I'd like to turn, oh, next slide, please, sorry. Now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Kevin McDonald, who will discuss our current path forward. Kevin?
Thank you, Michelle, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kevin Parks Mcdonald, and I serve as Deputy CEO for the organization. I saw a question pop up earlier about whether we had considered fuel cell, and thank you for that question. Next slide, please. Since we began our zero emissions journey back in 2010, our zero emissions fleet has been made up entirely of battery electric buses, or BEVs. And as you've heard from my colleagues, we've experienced some range and operational challenges with deploying BEVs on a subset of our lines. As we've looked to our neighbors at Sunline and OCTA and others, their fuel cell deployments show promise to address these issues. Additionally, putting all our eggs in the BEV basket could severely impact our ability to deliver service in the event of a loss of grid power at one or both of our operating facilities. Michelle just highlighted some of the findings of the Burns-McDonnell study, including the cost and the complexity of infrastructure construction and the operational challenges, as some of the major challenges to operating a fully battery electric fleet for a fleet of our size, 375 buses. At the operating facility, the mechanics or the logistics, I suppose, of the hydrogen fuel process will be very similar to the process of fueling a CNG bus, with each bus taking about 15 to 20 minutes in the fueling lane. Next slide, please. So how exactly does it work? This video shows that it's produced by New Flyer Industries, gives a good high-level overview.
What if we could use the most abundant element in the universe as a fuel source? And what if, instead of emitting greenhouse gases, transit buses produce clean water vapor? This isn't a far-off promise or a research project in progress. It's hydrogen fuel cell technology. In 1993, New Flyer and its technology partners unveiled the world's first hydrogen fuel cell electric bus. And we've been pioneering the technology ever since. It's safe, reliable, and it's making public transportation cleaner. Right now, hydrogen fuel cell electric buses, like our Excelsior Charge H2, are in motion across North America, and they're complementing existing fleets of battery electric buses. But why invest in hydrogen? What makes a hydrogen fuel cell electric bus different from a battery electric bus? To answer that, let's take a closer look at how it all fits together. A hydrogen fuel cell takes compressed hydrogen from the fuel tank and combines it with oxygen from the air. This process produces electricity, heat, and H2O, which leaves the tailpipe in the form of clean water vapor. The fuel cell functions as an onboard charger, providing power to charge the batteries while the bus is in motion. This eliminates the need to recharge the batteries at the depot or garage, and it extends the range of the bus up to 350 miles before needing to refuel. And refueling hydrogen is a breeze. It takes as little as 12 minutes to refill a 60-foot fuel cell bus, and only half that time for a 40-foot bus. Hydrogen is also incredibly clean and can help you further reduce your carbon footprint. Just one bus can save hundreds of tons of greenhouse gases every year. That's like taking up to 29 cars off the road, or planting up to 5,600 trees. It's time to take advantage of this zero-emission solution.
Thank you. So for our upcoming fuel cell deployment, we've engaged the services of a consultant, the Center for Transportation and the Environment, and they're currently working with us to develop the bus and the infrastructure specifications to begin both procurements in the upcoming months. Our timeline has fueling infrastructure construction completed in April of next year, 2022. Bus procurement will begin this May with a planned vehicle delivery schedule slated for July 2022 as well. And once the infrastructure and buses are in place, we'll begin in-service testing and performance and cost evaluation before making decisions on future bus procurements. Next slide, please. Our goal is to deploy 20 fuel cell electric buses on line 486 between El Monte and Pomona. We've received a transit and intercity rail capital program, or TIRCP grant, specifically to place ZEBs, or zero emissions buses, on that line that serves disadvantaged communities, a rail station, and 2 large college populations. Again, our ultimate goal is service resiliency through fleet and energy diversity. We'll collect and analyze performance and cost data for a real-life comparison of fuel cell buses versus battery electric buses as it relates to our particular service profile. And depending on the outcome, we may look to deploy fuel cell buses elsewhere in our service where it would be beneficial. Next slide, please. At this point, I'll hand it back to Roland to talk about an exciting project that's right around the corner. Roland?
Next slide, please. Hi, good afternoon. I'm really excited about our double-deck electric bus. Project started in October of 2016 when we demonstrated the diesel version of Alexander Dennis's double-deck bus in our Silver Streak route. We ran this for about a week, operating the bus from Montclair Transit Center to downtown LA, and we were able to clear all freeway overpasses, utility lines, as well as tree branches. Customers' reactions were overwhelmingly positive. This is our first 2 double-deck battery electric bus built by Alexander Dennis, and they arrived on the 20th of this month. And this is another first for Foothill Transit, as no other transit agency operates double-deck battery electric buses in the US. These high-capacity buses facilitate the transport of more passengers with a single bus, while also reducing our impact to the environment. And by the way, they also offer a smoother ride than our fleet of 60-foot articulated buses. Buses are equipped with a 648 kilowatt-hour battery energy with expected efficiency of 3 kilowatts per mile or 200 miles of range on a single charge. Next slide, please. The next slide contains a video on our design review and testing of a prototype double-deck battery electric bus.
We're absolutely delighted to have Foothill with us here today in Millbrook. They've come over to the UK to check on the progress of the project.
This is really an amazing experience for us to come here to Millbrook to see how the bus performs. We are really impressed. The quality, the ride quality, the performance is just outstanding.
ADI has been an amazing partner since the beginning. They've listened to what we're looking for in a vehicle. They've taught us a lot about what their vehicle can do.
We've been working with them, talking to them for about 2 or 3 years now.
We've been looking at this on paper for a long time, and to see it finally here in the flesh is it's amazing. It's a beautiful vehicle.
Particular example here is our engineering test vehicle. So this gives us the opportunity to fully prove out all of the batteries, all of the thermal systems, everything around the unique systems that make an EV.
What I love about the 500 is the design, first off. I mean, it's a really eye-catching design, and I think with our livery applied to it, it's really going to catch the attention of folks in the Los Angeles area. So we have a commitment to go all electric by 2030. We thought this vehicle would be ideal to take a lot of people, small footprint on the Los Angeles freeways.
Los Angeles is known to have one of the worst air qualities in the US. So our goal is to help clean the air.
So the benefits are clearly a low emission vehicle, 0 emissions. It deals with congestion. You can take 85 passengers fully seated on the bus. It takes away 85 cars on the road.
They have one particular route, which is their Silver Streak route, which is a high capacity commuter route. And they're very, very keen to put double-deck vehicles on that because of the capacity requirement.
Not just moving people from point A to point B, but it's more of having a sustainable and clean fleet to provide that service.
We're going to be doing quite a bit of
a field testing while we have them there and get some customer feedback on the vehicles. I think I know what the feedback is going to be. I'm pretty sure it's going to be very positive.
Well, I wish I could take this one home right now. It was actually really smooth, and my throttle response is incredible. I rarely had to use my brakes. As far as handling turns, it's amazing. It's like driving a little sports car. The steering is also smooth. It's quieter, less vibrations. I want to see how fast I could go, how fast it would maneuver on a turn, how fast I could take it on a turn. And I could actually do a figure 8, no problem.
The vehicle is comfortable. The ride quality is fantastic.
The higher capacity would provide us to move more people more efficiently with clean energy, with clean technology.
So we're looking forward to getting these vehicles, all electric, quiet, smooth ride from the San Gabriel Valley into downtown Los Angeles.
So it's a great opportunity for us to develop a strong business relationship with Foothill.
The Alexander double deck bus would play a vital role in California as we move forward.
Great. I think that was just a really great video. So, and of course, really great presentations from all of our speakers. I think it's really inspirational, the work that Foothill Transit is doing to advance zero emission vehicle technology to move people around the Foothill communities there. So thank you for your presentations. Now we're going to open up to questions and Q&A session from the audience. We had a couple that came up and I think they were answered during the presentation, but let me go back. We had one asked earlier, which was how frequently have the overhead chargers gone down and what kind of maintenance do they need? That's just for maybe Joe or anybody at Foothill who transit.
I'll take that one. I'll take that one.
So thanks, Roland.
Yeah, what's really interesting is our overhead chargers have worked so perfectly over the last 10 years that we've been using them. One funny thing that we experienced over the years is whenever a charger would be out of service, what we found out is there's a emergency button, an e-stop button on the charger unit itself. And that's for emergency purposes when you need to shut off the power into the charging station. And unfortunately, the electrical requirements does not require a locked cover for that e-stop button. And we've had few people that would press that button on a regular basis, not a regular basis, quite often. So that was our early issues in the beginning. So what our approach was, we put a sign above the e-stop button that the charging station was being surveilled with the surveillance cameras, and that cut that down drastically. So that was the only issue that we've had. In terms of maintenance, we contract with Proterra for the maintenance of the chargers, since it's their proprietary technology. There's a monthly inspection, just looking at all the wiring connections, the brushes, and so on. There's a every 6-month inspection, which covers more than what they normally do, looking at programming, look at the energy, checking out the charger capacity itself. And then there's an annual, which is a larger maintenance work where they have to take the charger and bring it down, kind of look at it, look at all the wirings and the communication system. So that's more of a I'd say more involved inspection of the chargers themselves. But overall, we've been happy with how the system works, and we've been able to charge our buses on the Pomona Transit Center for the last 10 years.
It's really great to hear that it's been a relatively smooth experience. We had another question. How does the well-to-wheel energy calculation look for fuel cell vehicles? And I'll leave that open to the Foothill Transit group, but also I pulled up a couple resources from the Department of Energy that I'll post here into the chat. Hopefully those will help.
Joseph, maybe I can start with this one. And I guess the short answer is, I don't know. So whatever you have in the chat that you're posting is certainly very valuable. I think in part, there's a really interesting discussion, I think, about well-to-wheel or complete energy capture for these various technologies. And that's certainly a part of the mix here. In part, that discussion is happening at a level that's beyond us. So we're working to achieve the mandates that have been put forward by the California Air Resources Board to go zero emission with the technologies that are available to us. And we're looking at both technologies closely, and we're looking at it from a variety of standpoints. As you heard in Michelle's presentation, we're looking at total cost of operation and really trying to figure out how do we get to that best overall cost of operation and cost of capital to deliver the service that we're trying to deliver and comply with the goals that have been set forward by the state of California. So it's a complex question. There is lots of research out there, but we're really looking to figure out how do we perfect these two technologies to accomplish our mission. I know my colleagues have more details on that, and I know, Joseph, you've got some great links here for us.
And nothing to add to that, Doran. I think the point is, it's similar on the electric side, where we look at where the grid power comes from. There's probably there's some challenges there as well, and we know on the hydrogen side there are going to be those clean issues that we need to look into as well. But yeah, we'll be tracking that down.
Great, thank you both. Moving on to another question. Are you using a smart charging management software? If so, what kind? If not, is there a timeline to start implementing it?
That's a Roland question.
Yeah, so we have a telematics system installed in our fleet of battery electric buses using Vericity, VIRCITI. This is how we monitor the performance of the electric bus, monitor performance of the drivers, the range, how our buses are performing. So that's the system that we're using right now. We opted to use Vericity because it's a third-party system in case that, if we ever move forward with buying electric buses with a different OEM, we can still use the same system. We're not tied down to one specific, or we wouldn't have to operate a system that's two different systems that comply with each type of different bus.
Great, thank you, Roland. Our next question is, how did Foothill Transit handle maintenance facility upgrades needed to charge zero emission buses, battery electric buses? Did the improvements get phased in, or were all improvements required all at once? And did the modification to the existing facilities require major upgrades on the utility side of the meter?
So for our overhead charging station, we partnered with Southern California Edison. What we actually partnered with Southern California Edison when we started this project 10 years ago. Not just in our facility charging stations, but also at our transit center, Pomona Transit Center, and at the Azusa Transit Intermodal Center. For our in-depot chargers, we were one of the 4 transit agencies that was part of the pilot program for the Transport Charge Ready program. And Southern California did a lot of the work in terms of the infrastructure, utility requirements from the transformer all the way up to our bus parking lot. Proterra, who provided us with the chargers, basically built, they had their system, and all I had to do was to connect to the grid. So a lot of that work in terms of specifications for utilities, wiring, electrical connections was all done by Southern California Edison. It was a great partnership for us. And I think they're moving forward with a second group of Transport Charge Ready program that I would recommend for everybody to apply for that, because that was a lot of headache that was taken away from us with the utilities doing all that work, including permitting, setting up the plans and whatnot.
And Joseph, to add to that, and a shout out to our colleagues at Southern California Edison. They have been really, really important partners and really engaged with us in terms of working through this journey. We're very grateful for their help. I think one of the key takeaways from our journey has been when you're looking at grid-powered equipment, working with the utility from which you will draw that power is absolutely critical to success. The vehicles are different; they're way different than CNG buses, different than diesel-powered buses. But it's not the bus piece of it that we found to be the most complex. It's the how are you going to charge these things? So again, our thanks to the folks at Edison. And for anyone who's looking at these technologies, whoever your underlying utility is, engage them early and gain their partnership, because it's crucial to the success of a program.
It's really great to hear that you've had great partnerships with SoCal Edison, and yeah, they definitely have an ambitious plan with their next Charge Ready 2 program. So hopefully we'll see a lot more of these partnerships and a lot more rollout of electric zero emission vehicles across our region. Next question we have is, what hydrogen refueling infrastructure are you preferencing, electrolyzer or delivered?
So we just started working with CTE on our fuel cell program. We're not looking at an electrolyzer. Over the last 3 meetings that we've had, there's been talk about trucking liquid hydrogen, but we're not at that point yet. We're still in the beginning portions of our project. As we move forward, we'll finalize that and see what path that we're going to take. But it's either going to be trucked in liquid or different forms of hydrogen, but we're not going to build an electrolyzer.
We'd love to build an electrolyzer. I think the challenge we run into is it's about real estate. And again, as we've looked at this program, both from a grid-powered standpoint and a hydrogen fuel cell standpoint, we're operating in Los Angeles County, where real estate is expensive and scarce. We're running at full capacity in terms of the number of buses that we can house at our operating facilities. And so as we add fueling infrastructure for either one of these technologies, again, that's been a real challenge. We'd love to be able to do, to have an electrolyzer on site. It's a real estate problem.
That's a great point, Doran, and that's something that we heard at our previous webinars the last 2 weeks as well, is that you need quite a large pad to be able to have an electrolyzer on site.
That's really one of our friends and colleagues at Sunline Transit, who again we collaborate with on a constant basis. They do have the good fortune of having a little more real estate to work with, and we're excited about what they're doing. We wish we could do what they're doing. We just don't have the room.
Absolutely. A few more questions we have here, and just as a reminder, everybody, you can enter your questions into the chat, or else you can also use the raise hand feature if you'd like to be unmuted and ask your questions. I like this next question. Will the new double-deck bus fit under your current charging canopy? Very practical question. Let's hope so.
Thank you very much. That was a good question. I think, as I mentioned earlier, well, the overhead is not an overhead charge bus, it's a plug-in bus. But on our canopy, the canopy was designed to be able to afford the charging, the double-deck bus to pull up underneath the canopy. The overhead structure is 16 feet tall, and our double-deck battery electric bus is 13 feet 6 inches tall. So we got a lot of room headway. And we took that into consideration when the in-depot charging infrastructure was being designed.
That's great.
Yeah, we don't want to see a topless double-deck battery electric bus after we've been delivered from the UK.
So I don't know if it's relevant, Roland, for you to mention, but we did have to raise the bus washer. Is that?
No, we didn't raise the bus wash. So we have an existing bus wash for our fleet of single floor buses. So what we did was on the bay next to our current current bus wash, we built a double-deck specific bus wash to accommodate that tall bus. So we wouldn't have to go out there with squeegees and trying to wipe this tall bus on it.
I was threatening to make Roland go out with one of those long pole brushes and a bucket, and that would be his weekend activity. But
yeah,
I think as fondly of that.
I asked our director of facilities, Charlene Bailey, to get it going, because I don't want to be out there on a platform scrubbing the side of that double-deck bus.
That's great. Thank you. Next question up is, do you anticipate any challenges with messaging to the community about the safety of fuel cell electric buses?
Oh, goody, one for me. there's the fun part about this is that there's some parallels with our current electric bus program that we can borrow from to talk about the science. But the other side of this is that because fuel cell technology is new to the public, it's a great chance to tell stories. And I love telling stories. That's why I'm in this position. But we're always looking to our partners who have already sort of gone ahead of us. So I think right now there are 3 agencies in the state of California that are running fuel cell buses. That's AC Transit up in the Bay Area. We've got Sunline here in the Palm Springs area, and then OCTA. And of course, like Doran said, we collaborate heavily with Sunline, and we'll be looking to them to see what were the things that they tripped up on first. Chances are, like with the electric bus technology, the big thing you want to hit on is safety. People want to know that it's a safe ride. And then once they figure out what this is all about, honestly, they just want to get to where they need to go, and they want to do it without a lot of fuss. So we'll be able to tell that big story at the beginning, and then hopefully this will just be another part of our fleet that everybody enjoys.
Great answer. Thank you. And this is, I think, more of a comment than a question, but I think it's a good one, and shows that we have a lot of experts, I think, and folks in the industry in the room. And I think this was in response to the well-to-wheels question, which was well-to-wheel efficiency can be viewed as, can we get enough renewable energy? Of course, that's important. Like, where's the energy coming from? This includes not only transmission and conversion losses, but the ability to capture remote or curtailed energy, or excuse me, renewables, and to distribute the energy in dense urban areas and high utilization fleets. Both aspects must be considered, and grid and hydrogen approaches have different advantages.
And I think, Joseph, as we look to the 2 technologies, and it really becomes more than just the bus. It really becomes the well to the wheel, if you will. Where does the energy come from, and how does that ultimately get to delivering the service? And one might say, we've talked, and our journey really focuses on both grid power and fuel cell. And so, a question that might come up is, okay, Foothill Transit, which way are you going? Are you going grid or are you going fuel cell? And I think the answer is yes, we think. We're not quite sure, but we think. And that's really, I think, a key point in where we are in this journey, where we're looking at both of these technologies. We think both of these technologies have a place in our transit delivery program. There's more work to be done to perfect the technologies and really optimize their use for different types of applications. The other part that we've got to continue to be focused on is, again, that beginning to end cycle. So it's not just about the bus, but it's where and how is the power being generated? Is it coming from a renewable source or not? As we know, the California power grid, the aspiration and the goal is to be completely green. We're not there yet. So we've got to keep pushing on all of these different fronts to really get to that true ultimate goal of being zero emission, from beginning to end, and having the ultimate environmental benefit. It's a complex challenge. It's it's one we've got to continue to lean in on all aspects of.
Really great points there. And yeah, that's certainly a question we see a lot. Hydrogen or battery, which is it going to be in all of the above right now?
Yep. I don't think this is for us older people like me, I don't think this is a VHS beta discussion. I think this is, I think we're going to have VHS and beta, not one or the other, I think. Now, who knows? 5 years from now, we'll come together and we'll know more. But I personally think this is going to be a combination. I think all of these solutions have to be applied to the challenge.
Absolutely. So I don't currently see any questions. Oh, okay, I see one. And my household has one BEV and one fuel cell. There are advantages of both, and I think it's wonderful that you're pursuing both. Yeah, definitely. I have a couple of questions, and to our audience, please feel free to keep typing your questions into the chat box. And I'm curious, what was so you've been now doing both battery and fuel cell. What's the public reaction been to adopting zero emission vehicles, and is that something that the public has been excited about, or is it more just kind of swapping it out, one bus to another? The folks care more about where they're getting to, where they need to go, rather than the actual vehicle doing it.
Kevin or Felicia, do you want to tackle that one?
I'll start on that one. I know one of the the early experiences we had with deploying the fast charge buses on line 291 in Pomona, and line 291 it's a real workhorse for us. There's a lot of boardings, lots of ons and offs, high ridership on that line. And early on, we discovered that some customers didn't even realize they were riding an electric bus. We would ask, how do you like the bus, the electric bus? It's like, oh, I didn't even know it was electric. So we kind of recrafted our branding on the outside to bring that more to light for customers, just so they would know it. But the other side of that was to a certain extent a good thing. They just wanted to get on the bus and get to where they were going, and that was happening. And so, so there were some pluses there, but we did want to kind of target that messaging. So maybe Felicia, if you want to add on anything there.
Yeah, I do actually. There was a story that I'll tell you. We had started when we opened up the north-south route from Azusa. That Azusa Intermodal Transit Center is actually also the start and end point for line 187, which goes into downtown Pasadena. And we had started to build in some electric bus usage on that line into downtown Pasadena. And it was just sort of part of our normal scheduling. We didn't think it was a big deal until the reporter from the Star News saw it in Pasadena and called me up and said, hey, so I just saw this bus in downtown Pasadena and it's all electric, and why didn't you tell me? And I felt a little bit sheepish and I apologized. I said, well, this is where collaboration helps. I didn't check with my team to see if we were putting it in downtown Pasadena. But he was very excited by the fact that our electric bus was the first electric bus in use in the city of Pasadena, and it became a big story. And when we then fed that through social media, the customer response was really positive, and people started asking, well, when is my city going to get a chance to get zero emission bus technology? I think people are really excited about the potential of this tech. I think people recognize on a lot of different levels that it is a quality of life improver in communities because it reduces sound pollution and it also reduces local air pollution. So there's a couple of different narratives you can hit with that. I think ultimately it does transition. There's excitement at first, and then eventually it's no big thing. And as long as it keeps working and getting people to where they need to go safely, that's ultimately what people care about.
That's a really great point. And I think I think it was Joe earlier who told us that Duarte was the first city to say, hey, we want these electric lines to come here. Have you, so it sounds like that's kind of becoming more widespread, that other cities, in addition to Duarte, are asking for these electric lines. And Joe, I think you also said that you have 4 lines that are wholly electrified right now. Is there a plan to electrify other lines, or are you going through a strategy of mixing them into other lines? What's your approach there?
Actually, kind of like what Felicia was saying, we've interlined some of the vehicle blocks on line 280 or some of the vehicle schedules. So we actually do have a smattering of the electric buses on other lines. They may not, these other lines may not be fully electric, but they do have them. So we have line 187, which, as Felicia mentioned, goes from Azusa to Pasadena. And it also goes along, I believe I've seen it on 178, which goes to the city of West Covina. So kind of like what Felicia was saying, it's kind of a hit and miss, find the electric bus. But this kind of helps us to kind of test the buses, really put it through its paces to make sure it can be used fleet-wide and just not, or system-wide and not just for a specific route.
And really the next step in the journey is to deploy the other zero emission bus, the fuel cell buses, which will be our next group of 20 buses coming into the fleet. Again, much in the same way. We have one particular line that we're planning to concentrate those vehicles on, but we're also looking to deploy the fuel cell buses on other routes to see what their performance is. So, right now it's sort of, spot the the grid-powered zero-emission buses in the fleet. There's 30 out of 370. But as the numbers grow, it'll be easier to spot them, whether it's a fuel cell bus, whether it's a grid-powered bus, but there'll be more of them in different parts of the community. And that's really cool.
Yeah, maybe it'll eventually be flipped. People will be like, oh, whoa, a CNG bus. Look at
there's
that.
that old bus.
How old school.
Exactly.
And Michelle, as we make this transition, what do you think how much of importance do you think subsidies and help from state government, and maybe also the federal government will play? And do you see that something that assistance can eventually be phased out in the next couple of years, or how do you kind of see that playing out?
Wow. Are we almost out of time? I don't know. So my dream is that the assistance would increase as we go through the next years. That in fact, the users of transportation will not have to pay more to ride cleaner buses, which benefit the whole region, which benefit the whole state, which benefit the whole area that's deploying them. And so how we will pay for those increased costs is, I don't know, but one of the things that happens frequently, I've been in government just a few years, and we get mandates, and we in finance call them unfunded mandates. It's like, okay, you will have all electric buses by 2030. Really? And where's the revenue going to come from to pay for those buses? So I'm hopeful that our progressive leadership in both the state and the feds, go Mayor Pete, will help us to have the kinds of revenues that we need, the kind of funding programs that we need to enable us to move swiftly towards this very important goal. Maybe I should run.
Well, and one little side note on that, Michelle, you're going to have to change your vocabulary, because as of today, I believe you should refer to him as Secretary Pete. So.
Yeah, he's not Mayor Pete anymore. Okay. Woohoo!
Right. Woo.
That's a lot of great points, Michelle. And I think as we heard from one of our guest speakers 2 weeks ago from ARB, Yachun Chow, she mentioned that these are electric vehicles for everybody. So by electrifying these vehicles, you're providing zero emission vehicles, to anybody who wants to use them to get around. And then another great point is that, it's probably going to take partnerships with, for example, SoCal Edison and others across the region and the state to actually make these things happen, because we can't necessarily go it alone, is what I'm hearing. All right, well, I'm seeing a slowdown on the questions in the sidebar. So, right when I spoke, we have another question. So keep them coming. We do have some more time today, but one that just popped up are, what are examples of workforce development and training needs related to your adoption of zero emission technology, and how have you addressed them?
Roland question for sure.
First off, I think in terms of training, as driver training, driving a zero emissions or battery electric bus is totally different from driving a CNG bus, which is equipped with an internal combustion engine. Drivers need to get familiarized on how they dock at a charging station. That's really important. As Joe mentioned earlier in his presentation, if you missed a charge, now you're going to add up additional time to charge your buses. So if a driver misses the charging port, and they have to go back around and pull up again. But in addition to that, mechanics training is really, really important. There's a lot of differences between, although there are similar mechanical systems on a CNG bus compared to a battery electric bus, but there are huge differences in terms of the propulsion system, the energy delivery system of a battery electric bus, as well as learning how to be safe when you're fixing or repairing a battery electric bus. Obviously, we don't want anybody to get injured. That's the last thing that we would want to see. There's a lot of software engineering that's required in terms of operating a battery electric bus and maintaining the energy and balancing the energies in the battery cells themselves. So there's a huge amount of training. Do we need to have engineers working at our facilities in order to understand this technology better? I don't know. Depends on what the OEMs want to provide. We do have robust training that's provided by Proterra for our mechanics, but I think there's additional training that's necessary to a point wherein, we might need someone who knows, who's familiar with software programming or whatnot. It's a very complex technology. It's so totally different from an internal combustion engine, and you need to have specific software requirements in order to diagnose a battery electric bus, and there's costs associated with that to be able to access the diagnostic system for each bus. And I think as we move forward, there are operational issues in terms of, large scale. Unfortunately, there hasn't been any large scale deployment of battery electric buses. So what's the impact of a large scale deployment when you have 200 battery electric buses and you have your planners and your dispatchers need to know where the buses are, what state of charge, what's been charged, how do you assign deploying those buses? So there's a lot of understanding and learning on the operation side that we haven't really touched. Everybody's been talking about driver and mechanics, but as we move forward with larger scale, then there's another throng of training that's required for your planning staff and your dispatching staff.
Really great points, Roland, and thank you to our audience for that question. Really important about the folks who are going to be working and operating these vehicles. Ed Kruger, you have your hand raised. I will unmute you now so you can, or I'll ask to unmute you and you can unmute yourself and ask your question. And while you unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted.
Oh, there you go.
Unmuted. I just asked if the webinar would be available, and you answered that on a chat piece with us that we'd be able to pick it up, because the information that's here is very well presented and interesting to a lot of people. That's it.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate that. And yes, to answer your question, it will be posted. I provided that link in the chat, and everybody who's registered will receive a link to the recordings and to the presentations as well. So thank you for your comment and for your interest in learning more. And I think we had one more question. Is your paratransit zero emission or planning to go zero emission in the near future?
Here in Los Angeles County, we handle the paratransit requirements a little bit differently in that all of the fixed route operators in Los Angeles County have pulled together to create a special purpose organization, Access Services. It's a public organization that provides paratransit on behalf of all of the operators. So from a Foothill Transit standpoint, we're not directly driving the paratransit program. I do have the honor of serving on the Access Services Board, and it is a topic that we're beginning to discuss. But I think in terms of where we are from the access standpoint, we've still got a lot of learning to do in terms of moving to zero emission vehicles for paratransit delivery. Much like fixed route bus delivery with paratransit operation, I'm sure many of the folks that are here with us know, those paratransit vehicles they're moving constantly. And so making sure that we can handle the range and making sure that we can handle the unusual events that happen, traffic congestion, issues that might come up that cause delays in transporting passengers. We've really got to make sure we've got enough energy to get the job done and take care of that more vulnerable population. So again, I think it's an area that we're going to see continue to evolve and advance, but we've got a long ways to go.
That's great. I'll put out a final call for any questions from the audience. We're getting into the last 14 minutes or so of the presentation or of our time today, but I'll give a quick last call for questions. All right, I have a last question of my own for Doran. So now you've been operating electric buses since 2010. And with that experience, with over 10 years under your belt, what are your biggest takeaways that you'd like to share with the audience?
Well, we've made a lot of progress. We've tried a lot of different things. We've learned a lot. I think in terms of takeaways, this is a space that continues to evolve, and we all have to lean in together to work together to figure out how to optimize it. Again, we've learned a lot. We share and collaborate constantly, and really, it's forums like this that are so important to advancing towards this goal of a zero-emission, sustainable, clean future. And Joseph, to you and all of our friends at SCAG, thanks for putting this series together, because it's really here that we can share the information and learn from each other. There's a lot more to be done, and we've still got a lot to learn as an industry, as providers, to ultimately optimize the technology and accomplish the goal that we've collectively set out towards accomplishing. We're excited about the future. We're committed to making it happen. But the other thing, and another key takeaway here, we've talked about this at a few points. We can be committed, we can be excited, we can be supportive, but we've got to have the resources to make it happen. And that's the other part of it. Without the resources, it's just a dream. With careful investment of resources, and that's resources at all levels, at the local level, at the state level, at the federal level, we can get there. But we've got to be able to pull together, to collaborate, to make those investments to make it all happen.
Those are really fantastic takeaways, Doran, and I think I hope our audience has a lot of takeaways of their own from this event. And speaking of takeaways, we're moving into our last bit of our session today, where we're going to do trivia, and we're going to have 4 lucky winners who are going to take home gift cards. So if Jennifer, if you'd please pull up our trivia, our first trivia slide. All right, so here are the rules. We're going to ask a few questions. We have 4 of them. You're going to type your answer into the chat box. The first correct response wins. Winners, please send your email address to a private message to Emily Rotman. You can see here in the participants box, so you can pull that up. And each participant will only win 1 prize. And it's really important that we get your email address, because we don't want to lose you. And we want to make sure that our winners get rewarded. So here we go. 4 questions. Type your answer into the chat box. First correct answer wins. Next slide, please. What year did Foothill Transit pilot its first zero-emission bus? And Emily, if you could let me know when we have a correct answer.
We have our winner, Janet.
All right, congrats, Janet. What's the answer there? 2010, that's correct. We had a lot of people get that correct, so a lot of people paying attention and with good memories. So thank you. Next slide. What's our next question? Question 2 is, how many of Foothill Transit's routes are fully electrified?
Kristen, 4 routes.
The correct answer was 4. 4 fully electrified routes, but as we heard, many other routes have some electric vehicles, and probably many more to come that'll be fully electrified. So question number 3 is, how many total service miles does Foothill Transit have on their electric buses? This was a little bit more difficult, so we made a multiple choice for you. I'll give it just a second to get some answers, and I think I see a correct one. The answer is C, 3.4 million miles and counting. So I guess that's not 100% accurate, because it's 3.4 million plus and increasing every day. That's really impressive, Foothill Transit. And our final question is, which city requested Foothill Transit specifically to run zero-emission buses for their service? A, Azusa, B, Baldwin Park, C, Covina, or D, Duarte?
We have a correct answer from Elizabeth.
All right, and the correct answer, of course, is D, Duarte. So please remember, if You were one of the first people to respond correctly. Send a message to Emily Roteman. She also put her email address there, roteman@scag.ca.gov, and she will message you with your gift cards. Yes, next slide, please, Jennifer. Just to close us out, thank you all to our speakers. Thank you all to our audience, of course, and for your great engagement and your questions. This is the end for our Innovations in Clean Transit series for now. We might take it up later, but we still have our Toolbox Tuesday series. The next one is coming up on February 16th at 10 a.m. and it will cover SCAG's Smart Growth Infrastructure website. So thank you all again and have a great rest of your day. All right, Emily, were you able to record everybody's answers?
Yeah, I was just messaging Jennifer. Yeah, I think we're good to go.
Perfect. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Okay, good. I'll leave it up.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, we can close out.
Okay, thank you guys.
Thanks, Jennifer.